live. All right. Thanks everybody for joining me today. Another episode of the MongoDB Podcast Live. And I'm really excited to begin this conversation. We're going to talk about job seekers and the skills that are super valuable for folks seeking a job in today's extremely competitive market. I've got an author with me. His name is Justin Jenkins, and he is a MongoDB enthusiast who's written a wonderful book entitled MongoDB for Jobseekers. So stay tuned. We're going to bring Justin in just a minute. While we're doing that, hello from Brazil, Rafael. It's great to have you on board. I'd like you to think about questions that you've got for Justin or for myself about skills that you might need if you want to leverage MongoDB in your journey to secure a job. Super valuable skill set. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Justin on board. Justin, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. Well, so tell the folks a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. I'm Justin Jenkins, and I'm currently a full stack developer, but I've been a DBA and a system or a database architect in the past as well, which is where I really got into MongoDB. But my passion is really coding and database stuff kind of together. And a good while ago, I started dabbling with MongoDB and just really liked it, and really found that I liked telling other people about it too. And so I've just been kind of trickling, doing stuff over a number of years with that, doing speaking, doing blog stuff, and then a couple during the pandemic, basically did a LinkedIn Learning course introducing people to MongoDB, and kind of through that got the opportunity to write this book. So, yeah.
Fantastic. How did you get, let's back up just a little bit. How did you get involved in software development and databases to begin with?
Yeah, so I was kind of tinkering with old computers in my elementary school, actually, that were old decommissioned, like, gosh, they might have even been like Atari or really old Macs or something, that they just didn't know what to do with. And I was like, hey, can I kind of mess around with these? And I managed to piece it together and build it. And at that point, it was that was already pretty old. And I just got really into that, and actually got a internship when I was still in high school working. I grew up in the DC area, so at a government contractor, and started coding there, and just really kind of fell in love with that. And someone gave me a chance to do kind of a database job after he saw some like, oh, you seem to like really kind of get data. And that was my first like database job. And I really liked kind of, that what's it in the beautiful mind where all the things are like floating around. That's kind of how I saw like databases, and it was just kind of a cool challenge.
Yeah. I love that. So it's fair to say you've got a curious mind.
Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah. I think that's a key requirement. I think it's difficult to foster, but I think it's not impossible. I think if you're curious and have the wherewithal to begin searching for knowledge and how to solve problems, I think that's going to be a really key skill. But so you've obviously got a number of skills in addition to just being curious. Writing a book is a difficult thing. How did you begin the process of thinking about, well, how to write a book, and why MongoDB for job seekers?
Yeah, it was very tough. I kind of knew going in it'd be tough, but it was even more tough than I thought. But it was definitely, it's kind of something I had in the back of my mind, like, oh, maybe someday I'll write a book. But the opportunity kind of came up. The publisher had seen my LinkedIn Learning course and was just kind of like, hey, we have like a niche we want to do for a job seeker book for MongoDB, and sounds like you know about MongoDB. And at first I kind of wasn't sure. I didn't know how that would kind of fit in a book. And but the more I thought about it, I kind of approached it of like, oh, this is a great way to write a book with really practical, real world examples of how to do things, as opposed to more, theoretical or computer sciencey type stuff, way of dealing with it, which really attracted me because I'm a self-taught programmer, and I had to learn a lot of this stuff on my own. and really had to figure out how to kind of simplify things that way, because I didn't necessarily know all the theory at the time as I was learning it. And so, writing something in a really practical way that someone can kind of pick up and apply to like a real job or a job they want was really attractive to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what is it that you do during the day? What do you do to pay the bills?
Aside from my two crazy boys, making sure they don't break any bones or anything, uh, yeah, I work at a company called PushPay as a full stack developer, and I actually work
Mhm.
on a product that helps manage churches. So there's a lot of data involved in that, if you
Mhm.
really come to think about it. And so that's a really fun kind of niche for me that I like working on. So I do a lot of that for my day job, just regular old full stack development. And then
Yeah.
in the evenings, I'll often be kind of thinking about, oh, what's another video or blog post I could do about something with MongoDB, and
Mhm.
that, and maybe playing some Tears of the Kingdom Zelda or something. So
Nice. Love that. I love that. So when you say you're a full stack developer, that can mean many different things. I automatically, lately anyway, go to React or Node.js just because of the versatility of the language. But what environments or frameworks do you use on a regular basis?
yeah, a lot of it is React. So we
Hmm.
do React and React Native. We also have some native apps that use
Hmm.
React Native, and we have a backend that is in a kind of a monolith written in PHP, and we also have some microservices, and some of those are more using Node or something a little newer-ish, but
Hmm.
we have kind of a lot invested in the monolith backend there in PHP. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a mostly React though day to day, and that, and just various data sources, not necessarily one single kind. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So obviously a skill set which is super valuable for developers today is React, Node.js. It's going to help you. But I want to get a little bit closer to the book. And you mentioned the publisher reached out with the idea for creating this book. And obviously you've got skills, experience, and knowledge around getting jobs that involve MongoDB. Let's go ahead and I'm going to post a link to the book. I don't know if folks can copy that down, but this will be available in the show notes after the fact. This is a link to the Amazon site in the US. Unfortunately, for folks outside the US, it might not work. I apologize for that. We'll try and do what we can to get multiple country links to Amazon. Where is it that you primarily send folks to buy the book?
Yeah, you could definitely find that on Amazon. Sometimes it messes up the search. The word Jobseekers, it doesn't think is one word, even though it is,
Yeah.
and it breaks it
Yeah.
up. So a lot of times I'll just send them to learnmongo.com, which is a site that I kind of post all my Mongo
Oh,
related stuff on.
let me have that
So
again.
just
MongoDB,
learnmongo.com. Yeah,
learnmongo.com.
.com. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll put that up so folks get that. Check that out if you're interested in purchasing Justin's book. Um, so let's talk about the content of the book. And I'm getting a number of comments. I want to address these too. There's a lot of folks asking about how to get a job at MongoDB. That's not necessarily what we're talking about today, although there are available opportunities on the MongoDB career site. I want to send folks there if you're interested in working at MongoDB. If you feel like you have the skill set for a particular opportunity, you can review mongodb.com/careers. But I'm going to put that on the side for a moment because we're really not talking about getting a job at MongoDB. We're talking about getting a job with MongoDB. So help me understand a little bit about the entry point. If I'm a developer, I like working with MongoDB, I want to be employed, and I want to get a job where I'm able to work with MongoDB. How does the book walk through that process, and maybe talk a little bit about the high level outline?
Yeah. So it's kind of a sort of a choose your own adventure type thing in the book. So we start off with a basic introduction to MongoDB and how it's different than other database types. and then talk about a couple different job roles and career paths you could take, because I think possibly a misconception for some people is, well, it's just for developers or something, or possibly for DBAs. But there really are a lot of other job, paths, even into like the sciences or business analytics or things like that, building data lakes, a lot of things that aren't necessarily, I'm building an application type work. And we kind of highlight, okay, this chapter you might want to, these 3 chapters you might really want to focus on if that's your kind of desired job role, though, reading all of them probably going to help you be a little more well-rounded. But there's definitely that kind of, if this is kind of the path you're looking for, like up front kind of say, well, definitely pay attention to these chapters, don't skip these. And it's kind of each kind of broken out into, here's about querying, here's about, document and data kind of structuring. And, those kind of things are pretty much going to apply for everyone. And then there's kind of separate chapters on more, security or replication or development in general. And we actually code a React app pretty much from scratch using Atlas in there, which we could probably talk some more about later. And so there's a whole chapter on that as well. So there's, I think, a little bit of something for everyone and pretty manageable size chapters. So, yeah.
That's a great intro. I like the way the book is laid out. It's logical. If you had to pick a couple of key capabilities, let's say somebody's coming to MongoDB with a basic understanding of what the document database is, how it works. Maybe they've launched MongoDB Atlas and built a free tier cluster, which you can do. It's free forever, by the way. M0 is a free instance. You can get to learn about MongoDB by deploying a sample data set. There's 9 databases that can be deployed, and you can review the structure and the schema. Let's say I've got that basic level of understanding about MongoDB. What are some key skills that I want to add to my resume in order to begin, well, even reading your book and hoping to land a job with MongoDB?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a couple different bits. Like one thing I think is most important that I touched on just then was document and schema design. If you really have even a basic good understanding of that, it's going to serve you really well long term. You're just going to be able to have really good data you can use going on in the future. And then also, understanding basic querying, I think is, pretty key in general for a database, but learning more about the aggregation framework as well is really great.
Hold up. So
Yeah.
what is this? What is this? What is an aggregation framework?
Yeah, kind of just threw that out there. So aggregation framework is, in really simple terms, a way to do a query in multiple steps. So each of those steps can kind of refine your data as you're doing it. So a super simple example is just saying, okay, like step 1, I want to match on the name Justin, and then I want to limit to 5 results. And you can do that with a normal query as well. But with the aggregation framework, you could throw in lots more kind of steps that do very complicated things. So
I think that's key.
you can,
I think that's key. The key thing with the aggregation framework is it's built into the MongoDB query language. And while simple commands like find will enable you to find specific documents based on a set of criteria, like if I'm searching through movies and want to find a particular title, db.movies.find, I pass a document which specifies the field title and the value, The Wizard of Oz. That's a very simple way to find that one particular movie. But the aggregation framework, if you're new to MongoDB, is a treasure trove. And the key thing you said there is its steps. They're sometimes called stages. I can specify a series of stages that I operate on the data using an operator, and then I pass the output of that operation to the next stage in the aggregation in the framework. So you can have a very complex sequence which actually is very simplified in that it is broken down into stages. And you mentioned something key too. So folks that are listening, if you're just new to the aggregation framework, one key thing that you're going to want to remember is match first, right? You mentioned that. You want to use the $match operator first, so you limit the size of the data set that you pass on to the subsequent phases. So great call out, learning the aggregation framework. How did you learn about the aggregation framework?
So I've been using MongoDB off and on even before it was 1.0. So back when it was like the point whatever days, and that didn't exist at that point, obviously.
Yeah.
And it'd be rather difficult sometimes because you'd have to bring back the data to your client and then kind of massage it and maybe go back and forth. And the aggregation framework is really great because you can do that all kind of server side, database side. And so when that first came out, I was a bit intimidated because it's a quite different looking query. It's a different kind of way to think about it. And I actually, like I said, I was intimidated, but I actually didn't realize how simple it really is. It's actually not that complicated at all.
I think that's that's a common experience. I think it's easy to be intimidated out of the box, right?
Yeah. And there's so many options that it also seems intimidating, but that's why, I was talking about the match thing. It really is as simple as, I'm matching something, I'm filtering something. It's pretty much every step of that. You're just kind of doing those different operations. So I didn't even pick it up at first, but then once I did, I started using it all the time and kind of figuring out different ways I could tweak things and do interesting queries with it.
So we're getting some great comments and some great questions. Again, if you're looking for a job, I don't have any specific advice for you today. Apologies, but the advice that Justin has is learn MongoDB, and you can find more information in the book. It's available on Amazon. You can search for MongoDB for Jobseekers, and Jobseekers is one word, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yep. MongoDB for Jobseekers. So if you want to search for that, wherever you find it, that'll be good. There's a question from Jason Whitney. Thank you, Jason. And it looks like it's been answered, but I'm going to ask you, Justin, is the aggregation framework talked about in the book?
Yeah, definitely. There's basically an entire chapter on it. And throughout the book, I used the example of a recipe document. So I think it's a great way to explain like how documents can store a lot of data, because say you look at a recipe on a sheet of paper and you think that's kind of simple and straightforward, but really there's a lot of data there. There's the title of the recipe, maybe a description, but then there's ingredients, and those ingredients might have units and amounts, and those are different units and amounts, and they're different types of ingredients. And then there's steps, and the steps have a certain order you have to do them. You can't just do them in any kind of order. So, that starts bringing in things like array data types and object data types and sub documents, which are just a document inside a document. And it actually can get pretty complicated data wise, but when you kind of see it as a recipe, that makes a lot more sense, I think, to people's brains really quickly. So we have a whole chapter in there kind of taking that recipe data and doing different aggregation queries on it to find different things. Like, I want to find all the recipes that are breakfast that I can cook in less than 15 minutes that don't have eggs in them or something. So I don't think that exact example is in there, but it's things like that. Yeah.
Yep. That's a great example. I love recipes because it's a logical way to think about expressing data and relationships between data elements. If you want more information on the aggregation framework, of course, you can go to learnmongo.com, or you can visit the docs at mongodb.com/docs/manual/aggregation. And once again, we'll put the link to your site, Learn Mongo. So once I've got an idea about some aggregations, what about the layout and schemas? If folks are coming to MongoDB from a relational mindset where they're creating tables and schemas, what's key to understand about MongoDB as it relates to the differences between, say, MySQL or Postgres and a document-oriented database like MongoDB?
Sure. So I think there's a little bit of misconception sometimes, maybe that MongoDB is schemaless. I think it might have even been marketed as that at one
Yeah,
point, but
at one point.
it's completely untrue.
Mhm.
There definitely is a schema. It's just the schemas per document. So whereas in a relational database, you have a table and it has, rows and columns, and they all need to be the same for every row in that table. A table of players on a team all have to have, a name and a position and that sort of thing. But with documents, each individual one can be its own, you know, separate thing. So that allows you to store really complex data while still being really well structured. And so you can store things beyond just strings and integers. You can actually store an array of data, for example. That's where like that recipe comes in. You can have the steps of the recipe in an array that's ordered in a very particular way, and that way it's always going to be right. And you use in the queries, use kind of a JavaScript-like language to interact with that query. So you're going to do very similar things if you're used to JavaScript or similar languages, popping things off an array or inserting things in an array, that sort of thing. And you can get really complicated too, where I was kind of referencing this before. You can have a document inside a document. So you can have the kind of atomic little structure over here of this thing inside a bigger document. So a lot of times an example of that is like a blog post. Instead of having just the title and description or something of the blog post, you could also embed in that same document user comments for that blog post, or different metadata about that. And then you're querying for one document for that blog post instead of querying multiple different tables and trying to bring your data back together. And that's where I think a lot of the power is. You can store the data just how your client is going to display it or use it, instead of breaking up your data and piecing it back together and hoping you got it right.
I love that. There's a question from Sridhar. How to do complex SQL-like in database in MongoDB? And I think we're really touching on that now. So we're talking about creating a structure for your documents. And you mentioned schema-less. It is schema-less in that the schema doesn't really exist apart from the data. I like to use the word schema on read. So the schema exists as it's portrayed in the documents that are the data. So key thing to remember about the difference between relational technologies and MongoDB is that the schema doesn't exist apart from the data itself. Now you can implement things like an ODM or an ORM, an object relational mapper, and that kind of becomes the schema reference. But really, when you want to find the schema, where do you look, Justin?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways. I guess if you're really concerned about schema, there is also schema validation you can do in a collection. So you can say, oh, all the documents in this collection need to have this field or this field of this type. But generally, you don't need that because, like you're saying, each individual document can have that. A great way to visualize some of this is just downloading the free MongoDB Compass GUI that MongoDB provides, and it has a little tab in there inside your collection. So a collection is a collection of documents. So it's where you store similar documents together, or maybe very dissimilar documents, depends. And there's a little tab on there that will analyze your schema, and it gives you some pretty cool visualizations of like, oh, this many documents have this field in it, and here's a common value for that field. So I find that's a really great way to visualize that. And then you can literally just query it back, and you're going to get something that looks like JSON. It's called BSON, binary JSON, but it looks like a JSON document, if you're familiar with that from pretty much all modern programming. And it will break down like the array and the objects and the different types I was mentioning into JSON. So there's also a cool, I think it just went fully GA, Visual Studio Code plugin or extension that will also do a lot of this. And you can kind of just click a document and it opens as a JSON looking document right in your Visual Studio Code, which is really cool and a great way to visualize it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you cover that in the book at all? The code extensions, Visual Studio?
Yeah. So there's kind of a chapter that's kind of like, tools to help you out. And so in that we talk about MongoDB Compass and a bit
Hmm.
about the extension. As I was writing, it wasn't released yet, but I tried to talk about things I knew were going to be in the final version. So that's
Hmm.
definitely talked about in there, as well as some other tools that you can use that are mostly provided by MongoDB itself. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So there's a question from Satyender. He's asking, are there any real world use cases where relational database is converted to Mongo? And I want to touch on this. I don't know that if you cover this in your book, but MongoDB has released a tool called the Relational Migrator. So this Relational Migrator enables you to connect to your relational database, whether it be MySQL, Postgres, for example, and then begin to visualize a path from relational to documents. The Relational Migrator does a great job of enabling you to chart the path between tables and documents. So you're definitely going to want to check out the Relational Migrator. I'll try and scare up a link to that, Satyender. That was a great question. Do you, in fact, cover that in your book? It's pretty early, late breaking.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. That particular thing, I didn't, though. A plug for being a MongoDB enthusiast, which I am. I got to see
Mhm.
a before release kind of demo of that from the product managers over there, and it was really cool. It it's super smart. It analyzes all your foreign keys in your SQL database and things like that, and figures out how to construct a document out of that. So it's kind of amazing. It takes a whole bunch of tables and makes a document, like I was saying, where it can figure out how to put something in as like a sub document, and if that exists in multiple different kinds of documents, it like updates that everywhere. And you can even kind of leave it on as you edit things in your SQL database, and it will edit
Mhm.
it over in your MongoDB kind of instance. So yeah, that's definitely a really cool tool. Most of what I talk about in the book is kind of the practical side of doing that. Like, okay, if you're used to this kind of table and this kind of data structure, here's how you could represent that in a MongoDB document or a MongoDB collection. So you definitely get, the basic idea of how that works. The relational migrator will really magically do a lot of that for you. And I think kind
Mhm.
of what I have in the book will give you a practical understanding of like how it's doing that and why it made certain decisions, um, you know, eh, in
I, I'd
how it
love
composed the document.
I'd love to ask the audience if they want to see the Relational Migrator. I wonder if folks, if you want to see it, we can give you a quick peek at it. Let us know. I could also show the MongoDB Compass, which is a really phenomenal user interface for your laptop, your desktop. Allows you to connect and view your data, edit it. What do we think? No comments coming through on the Relational Migrator. Maybe we skip that, but I have it
They'll
up
want to see
and
it later.
yeah, right. Oh, yep. Satchendra says, yep. Let's go ahead and share a quick peek at MongoDB's Relational Migrator. So I know this isn't specifically about your book, but here what I've done is I've created a database in, I believe it was created in Postgres. Okay. And I've connected to that Postgres database and it's read the database and all of the associated tables. That's what's here in the upper portion of the screen. I have 3 tables, and then I've charted a path to migrating that to a single collection called author with embedded references to work, which is a separate table in the relational database. Now it's becoming an embedded, and travel. So for every author, authors travel and authors produce works. In the relational world, you really don't have a choice, right, Justin? You literally need to create
Yep.
3 separate tables. But with MongoDB, you get the choice and you can map a separate table to an embedded object. And you do that by creating these rule sets. So here I'm saying that I'm going to go from 3 tables to 1 collection of documents. And in that collection, I'm going to bring all of the author elements here, as you see in the top 3, 4. And then I'm going to create a new field for work, and I'm going to embed those. So it's fairly straightforward, fairly intuitive. Just give you a quick peek at what the Relational Migrator looks like. Absolutely recommend folks take a look at Relational Migrator. The link is there on the screen, and I'll include links in the show notes when this comes out. So check that out. Awesome. Okay, so we talked about some tools. MongoDB Compass is another one. How much do you use Compass in your day-to-day work?
With MongoDB fairly often. So another cool thing about Compass is if you are a person that likes to occasionally just write your query right on the kind of command line looking interface,
Mm-hmm.
it has a little thing on the bottom left, I think. You can pop it up and it'll give you a little Mongo shell. So
Yeah.
that I really like the combination of those things. Like sometimes seeing it very visually there, clicking on that schema,
Mm-hmm.
or the new in the aggregation, the kind of free flowing way you can now do aggregation is pretty cool. But yeah, I like how I can switch there and do kind of command liney things that I know just almost, just without thinking I can type. And then
Uh-huh.
when I can't remember something, it's sometimes nicer to kind of poke around in the GUI there. And
Yeah.
one really cool thing talking about the aggregation kind of steps is it will in the aggregations tab there will kind of show you let you kind of build up stage by stage and kind of see a
Mm-hmm.
preview of how that data is looking. And in the book we talk about that. Both talk about how the actual query is written, and then the also showing you in MongoDB Compass. And I like personally a lot switching over that text, that toggle. So there's kind of a stages and a text toggle kind of on the right there, and you can switch it over to write your query each stage just like you would on the command line, but then you get all the
Mm-hmm.
visual benefits of seeing it. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
really cool addition. Actually went back and edited the chapter when they released that because I thought that was so great. So
Oh, so you had to go back and edit?
yeah, that particular thing,
Yeah.
just because I thought that was so cool, such a nice change for at least people like me, that the way they like to write those queries. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm in Compass now, and I'm just trying to fumble through some examples of the aggregation framework, and it looks like I'm not connected, so I'll need to reconnect. But you kind of get the idea. This is what Compass looks like. I love the schema visualization aspect. So Compass does a really great job of trying to assume what humans prefer in terms of looking at data. And it does this by scouring the collection and sampling it at, I think the default is 1,000 documents. And then it represents that data using something human readable. So rather than coordinates being, lat 41.55. Blah, 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 it puts pins on a map. I love that. It's thinking about what the best way to communicate this data and visualize it for humans is. So really amazing tool. So we're talking, if you're just joining, we're talking to Justin Jenkins, who's written a book called MongoDB for Jobseekers. And we're kind of walking through some of the tools that are going to enhance your ability to learn MongoDB and add that skill set to your resume. Let's see. So if you've got questions, you can put them in the chat. I'm just going to peruse here. Well, what are some companies? I think the great thing about MongoDB is it's a fairly general purpose database. It's in use across so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of companies across the world. Any thoughts on that, though? What are some use cases or companies that you think would be really good for targeting for possible employment?
Yeah, I think having this skill in general is great just to have on your resume, and so you kind of show that you can think about data and databases a little bit differently.
Hmm.
And in my case, a number of places I've worked, they weren't using MongoDB when I first got there. And over the course of time, I was able to say, hey, why don't you try it on this project or this project? Now, that's when it was a bit newer. I think now I think I was reading the Stack Overflow survey, and there's something like, close to 30% of certain developers, like their first database that they used was MongoDB, and which was kind of surprising to me. And that is becoming more and more, I think, a thing because companies want to be able to kind of move faster and build stuff more quickly. And
Hmm.
that can be rather difficult or sometimes somewhat impossible with relational databases. And I don't mean to knock them. Like I've also used them together all the time. So I think that's another misconception people have is like, oh, do I have to convert completely over to MongoDB? And it's like, no, you can use different databases where they excel. And it happens to be that MongoDB is now excelling at more and more things than it
Hmm.
has in the past. So it can be used for pretty much everything at this point. But you could still use those things together. And I think there's a lot of companies that use it for kind of microservice architecture, so they can
Hmm.
quickly build a microservice and kind of not have to worry ahead of time about all the schema and how their tables and all their data set up. They can just start building it. And that's a really powerful thing I think you can do with MongoDB.
Yeah.
Uh, I was explaining to someone the other day who was saying, how would a company kind of use it? And one that came to mind is a company that basically does an online version of kind of Photoshop. And the way that works is, if you think about, if you ever used Photoshop, something like that, you have
Hmm.
a lot of things going on. Really, you have a lot. If you really start thinking about it, you have layers and things and text and effects you've done
Hmm.
on the layers and a history of the edits you've done, and gradients and all these kinds of things. And the really cool way they represent that is that's all in one document. So your document that you're working on is represented by a MongoDB document, and it can store all those things I just talked about in one
Mm.
document. So you're not locking up multiple tables when you're going and looking up this data or editing your history of it. And then if you need to copy and you want to just, I want a complete copy of this, they literally copy the MongoDB document and has all your same history and everything in it.
Yeah.
So it's a really, I think, a way people can kind of understand that a little bit better. It's like, oh, it's kind of like a Word document that I copied, except for, it's
Yeah.
not all weird and corrupted like Word documents get. It's actually structured in a very nice way in the database. So, yeah.
A document in the purest sense of the word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Now you mentioned the fact that you're a MongoDB enthusiast and you participate in the MongoDB community. What does that look like, and how did you get in there? I've seen you at a lot of the MongoDB user group events. Talk about the MongoDB enthusiast program.
Yeah, so it is a program. There's kind of a couple levels of it, but
Hmm.
that's something where if you have kind of done some level, you can kind of enter in. Even like there's some people in the program that hardly have used MongoDB at all. They're just really interested in it and they're passionate about learning it and teaching other people about it. Or there's all the way to people more like myself that maybe have been doing that for a couple years and have stuff that's going on. And it's essentially, you're committing to, at a minimum, producing a couple things or going to the forums and helping people out, a couple times a month or something at a minimum. And then you can go much further than that if you'd like to. And the benefits you kind of can get out of that is a lot of access to kind of internal early stuff and learning about things before they're released, and getting a lot of connections with different people that work at MongoDB. And also, if you're doing stuff, they might promote it. Like right now, getting my book promoted, and that all kind of happened just from. Actually, remind me a bit. There's an episode, maybe it was a couple weeks ago now, with Niall from Kodu,
Yeah.
and he was talking about, just go out there and do something. Like don't worry about the metrics in the moment or how many people you think are reading it or seeing it. And I experienced a bit of that in the past. Like when I first started doing some MongoDB stuff and I put it out there in a blog or something, and I'm like, oh, I'm only getting a couple hits. Like, is anyone even seeing this or caring? Um, and then after doing that for a number of months, it was like, someone's like, oh, can you come talk at this code camp? And just some random person contacted me. And then it was like, oh, can you do this lightning talk at a MongoDB, thing? And then over time, it was like someone reached out from LinkedIn. Hey, would you want to do a course? Oh, sure. And from that, the book. So a lot of that happened to me from just putting some content out there and helping in little ways that I could and answering questions on Twitter or something. And that's something that the MongoDB enthusiast and champion program helps give you a little structure to do that a little more easily. So it's a really cool program. I especially like getting to see some of the early access features and kind of talking to the people that made it, and and asking questions of that, and also giving feedback of like, hey, it'd be really great if you added this bit or that feature, and being able to talk directly to someone is really great.
Isn't that great? I think that's one of the most valuable opportunities that you get from being a part of the MongoDB community advocacy program. There are several levels. There's community champions, community enthusiasts, and as you mentioned, we're here to nurture you as a professional interested in using MongoDB, and help you kind of build your own personal brand and do that through the lens of the MongoDB community. So if you're interested in more information about how to become a MongoDB community enthusiast like Justin, you can check out mongodb.com/community/advocacy. The program is explained there in detail. I did want to bring up, you mentioned Niall from Kodu. What a wonderful episode that was of the podcast. My colleague Shane McAllister interviewed Niall, who runs the Kodu community. And that's episode 170 of the podcast. You can take a listen to that and learn more about what Niall's doing and how he's engaged in the MongoDB community and building a community of his own called Kodu. So definitely check that out. Shameless plugs while we're doing it. You can check out this live stream, many more live streams that we've got planned. We've got shows planned throughout the week. We've got about 6 shows that go off every day, and there's something for everybody. You can review previously aired episodes of MongoDB Podcast Live, and if you jump into the YouTube channel, you can subscribe so you don't miss a thing. All shows that are aired as a part of the MongoDB podcast and MongoDB TV, they end up in YouTube. So if you subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/MongoDB, you will not miss a single one. You'll get notified about that. So once again, you can get more information at mongodb.tv. You can watch this in replay there, and you can watch some of the other shows that have aired and look for upcoming episodes of the MongoDB podcast live. Justin, it's been a great conversation. I want to ask you if we've missed anything on the book. Are there any key salient points you want to make before we begin to wrap up the episode?
Yeah. So like I said, it's kind of a bit of a choose your own adventure thing there. So
I like
it
the structure,
really,
by the way. Yeah.
thanks. I tried to do it in a way I just felt kind of is logical and built on things, and hopefully doesn't overwhelm you too much as you're going. And you can kind of skip a chapter if you want, but I tried to write each thing of like, oh, here's kind of an introduction in it. Also, here's some resources if you want to dig deeper in it that you can go. I think that it's not just helpful of like, oh, I'm currently looking for a job or something. It may be, I want to learn this to enhance my current role, or like I was saying, I'm going to learn this and then push internally to get MongoDB used here, because I referenced the Stack Overflow survey. It's something like almost 28% of all the developers mentioned in that said they used MongoDB in the last year, which is kind of a lot if you think about it, well over a quarter. And of those, like 60% like rated it as loved using it. So I mean, if you've used databases and had the frustration of databases, if 60% of people are saying they loved it, then that's a pretty good sign. So that's a great thing there. A couple things also that are kind of cool, I think, in the book is toward the end, after we've built up all that knowledge, we talk a bit more about Atlas and the Atlas services that are available, and build the app I kind of mentioned. It's called MongoQuest. You can actually go to it at mongoquest.com. And basically, it's a little game sort of that has interview type questions and a possible response. And you can kind of put in your own response and kind of goes through stages in there to kind of test your knowledge. And then it references back to the chapter in the book where we talked about that if you need to kind of refresh yourself. And the cool part is there's a whole chapter where it literally talks about how we built it, like has the React code for that and a link to a repository with the whole code of how we built it. And it's all using Atlas services. So the Realm SDK on there, and then talks to a Atlas cluster and gets all the data back for that. And then each question is stored itself in a document, of course, because it's MongoDB, and you can kind of view the document for the question that you're working on. So I think it's a cool way to kind of wrap up the book there with there's like 50 different kind of sample interview questions, and it's great even if you're not planning to interview for it. It's just great to kind of quiz yourself and test and see how well you retain the knowledge and stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, great summary. Once again, this is Justin Jenkins, author of MongoDB for Jobseekers. You can get more information at learnmongo.com. And as always, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out the podcast at mongodb.com/podcast. We're coming to a city near you with mongodb.local. The podcast is appearing live at many of those events. So join us in person. It's a fairly low price of entry, and you can hit me up for coupon codes, which will offer a discount. The coupon code podcast is available, and I think that's a 50% discount. So if you check out mongodb.com/events and you find a .local coming to a city near you, leverage the podcast coupon code for a 50% discount. And Justin, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks. It's great. Great chat.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.